I don't get post-production blues, which I used to, because when you have the intensity of the shoot on a day-by-day basis and then it all stops, then you've got a different thing that's happening, because now you're editing. And there's no question about it, the filming side is a bit like a drug, you know. You kind of start to love-hate it. On one hand, you wish to God it would finish, and the other hand, when it finishes, you miss it.
Okay, one more.
And it takes on a life and world of its own. That's the danger of filming so often, actually. I mean, to be professional crew, where you may do 3 films a year, it's very damaging. It's tricky to life and to, you know, you're suddenly always living in the film, which is something you've got to be careful about. You've got to be sensible.
I learned a lot in the movie, and I've always been interested in not only, you know, acting in films, but making films, and I've always taken the opportunity to learn as much as I can from that point of view, and, you know, having a chance to watch Ridley work, and also Tom Rolfe, our editor. I used to go into the editing room while we were on location in Japan when the days I wasn't working, and he was gracious enough to let me sit in the cutting room and just watch him work and ask him questions.
I try to cut action as tightly as possible because the audience is really they're ahead of you. And if you got your leading man, he's not going to die right then. So you don't want to bore them with any kind of excesses. But I think the picture has a good kind of staccato beat to it that it moves right along. Although I remember the scraping along the floor of the garage. When I first saw that in dailies, I didn't think it was going to work. I thought it was a little too over the top. I just thought it was a little too melodramatic, the whole thing. And in putting it together the first time, I don't think I even used the scrape of the sword. And then when we ran it with Ridley, he said, "Whatever happened to the sword scrape?" or something to that effect. And I said, "Oh, I think," whatever I said. He said, "Let's try it." And we put it in a different introduction, I think. But it certainly does work now. It's a bit of flamboyance in the sequence that really pulls it off.
I remember when Ridley showed us the first cut of the movie, it was about 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it was brilliant. Stanley and I were just knocked out by it. It was extraordinary. But this was his first cut. And so we all knew that he was going to go in and make the movie under 2 hours. So we were thrilled. I mean, the texture of the movie, the performances, the story, the visuals, the sound, everything was just brilliant. And then Ridley called us back, I don't know whether it was 4 weeks later, and he showed us a movie that was like 1 hour and 50 minutes long. And this may be one of the few times in both of our lives that we looked at him and we said, "What did you do?" And he said, "What do you mean, what did I do?" I said, "You took out all the good stuff. I mean, why did you make it this?" He says, "But I had to," and he did have to. In order to make it under 2 hours, he had to take out some of the texture, some of the finest scenes in the movie. So we said, "You know something? Just make it the right length. It doesn't have to be under 2 hours. Just make it the right length."
So we went back after that and reinserted some of the footage that we had taken out. And that seemed to make it play at a different rhythm and it worked better. I think it was the only time in my career that I ever had that happen.
And then I sat there watching a very good film called Rain Man. I think one of Barry Levinson's best movies. And I became conscious of the score. It kind of felt bigger than it ought to be, and yet it worked. It was playing internal world, yet it was a big track. And I waited and thought, who's that? Oh, Hans Zimmer, who the hell's that? Oh, I'll call him up. So I called him up. That was it. I was impressed by the music, as simple as that.
We just started chatting. We had a good time chatting, and I said to him, so how do I not get fired of a Ridley Scott film? I remember this, and he said, well, don't write me a symphony. Write something that's appropriate for the movie. And we sort of started working away, and we started coming up with some fairly unconventional ideas.
And one of the best music cues I've ever been associated with was, for me, the aerial shot coming into Japan when they're returning Sato's character. It's very visceral, and it sets the tone for the rest of the movie, and I thought it was a phenomenal cue.
I was aware that not all scores had to be done orchestrally, and that there was an interesting way to present a foreign culture to America or to Europe, etc., by using some of the instruments from that, from that culture. It's so easy to go and steal all the cliches from a culture and sort of, string them together and go, hey, here it is. As opposed to just saying, okay, I'm just writing from my point of view, but I'm going to interpret it by musicians from that culture. There's a very strong sense of percussion in Japanese culture. And because Ridley shot the film in a very sort of modern way, and it was Osaka where he shot a lot of stuff. It's very industrial. So for all the percussive elements, I used synthesizers and electronics because I wanted it to be, really hard. I wanted each percussion hit to be like a gunshot.
We have a tradition. When someone close to us dies, we keep something personal of his.
That scene was the key scene for me, where everything changed for everybody, and a sense of intimacy had to creep into, and the bravura had to go out of the window. So that's really, I remember I spent forever in this little room with my synthesizers just writing that scene, before there was any footage even, and it was written quite apart from the movie. And I remember seeing it on the film for the first time and going, oh yeah, that works. It was a cornerstone that would allow me to go and make all this big racket everywhere else.
I saw it for the first time at a test screening of the film. I enjoyed it very much. I remember Ridley would sit at the control, writing the sound, and whenever he wanted to, he'd just crank up the sound, So he likes the loud movie, He likes to be in your face with it at times. Sound is a very important element in films, and Ridley certainly doesn't shy away from it.
After the movie was released, there were certain people in the United States that wrote critiques of the movie and said that we weren't depicting the Japanese culture correctly.
We made a picture. The Japanese, in this particular case, happened to be the culture we were exploring. And some of the Japanese aren't nice people, and some of them are wonderful people. We were dealing with a particular evil man and a culture, the Yakuza culture, which if we did it in Italy, you'd say we were anti-Italian. It's not about that.
And I remember when the picture first came out, there was a very influential critic who called it a racist film in terms of how he depicted the Japanese. And I remember, this really bothered me, I remember calling him up and saying, let me just ask you, have you ever been to Japan? There's a silence. No. I said, then what do you think you're talking about? And then about a week after that, Black Rain was nominated in Japan as one of the best foreign films. And one of the joys that we had when you're doing your press over this, and we went over to Japan, I remember a very respected critic and writer said, well, this is the best Japanese film I've seen this year. So it was a real compliment to Ridley Scott and to all the other people involved in the production.
So I always found it interesting that Americans sometimes thought we weren't doing it right, but the Japanese, in fact, loved the movie and applauded the depiction of the Japanese.
Ridley made a wonderful movie, and Michael was terrific in it, and it's different, and it's very visual, and the sound is a very real element, so it's a total experience, and I think people like that.
That particular time, filmmaking, the filmmakers were really playing with the art form and bumping it up and bumping it up. It was an incredibly exciting time, and I thought it was something that I had never seen before, something that I was very proud to be a part of, very proud.
And the movie holds up extraordinarily. I mean, I get always a lot of comments about that film and how much people love that film. It's a time that I look back at it, with great fond memories and great admiration.
Here we go, guys.
Bar mitzvah. It's a great bar mitzvah, wasn't it? Going through both those times, the 70s and the 80s, I think we were allowed a little more options. There was more trust in the filmmaking process. Marketing was always an important aspect, but you seem to be able to go ahead and make your movie and make your statement. I'm proud of the fact that during that time people used to say, when I see your name, Michael Douglas, I don't know what it's going to be, but I know it's going to be good. And that's what I've always just tried to do, is to try to be unpredictable and hopefully good. Good to me. How to live to you guys?
Great.
Pretty good. Like it? Good. I'm taking tickets here. People always ask me in your career, what's your favorite movie? And you work as hard on your successes as your failures. But I'd have to say Black Rain is right up there for the unique qualities of this movie, the execution across the board.
I always watch it with interest, and I don't often watch my movies. Occasionally, from time to time, I'll see it on something and I'll sit there for 5 minutes, think, I'll check with it. If I'm still with it at the end, that usually speaks for itself. But no, I'm very happy to see it again. Looks good.